Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We are your hosts, Adriana Ame and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday. On today's episode, we are so excited to be joined by Janis Treiber. Janis is the Director of Visitor Experience and Retail in North Carolina Museum of Art at Raleigh, North Carolina. In this role, she leads a service-focused team with a passion for art, community, and uplifting artists and artisans from across our great state. A large part of her life has been spent in philanthropic efforts, and now what she does at the museum allows her to focus on being a part of her work life as well. She hopes to create and leave a legacy of welcoming and belonging in our community and the world. So thank you so much, Janis, for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yay! We're so glad you joined us. I'm trying to think because, before we dive into all the questions about when we met, I believe officially, I'm sure we've all crossed paths some way or another. But I believe officially we probably met at a First Friday last year sometime, maybe summer or fall, somewhere around there. And then, of course, we've crossed paths at things like Art in Bloom, and then there's the Emerging Artisan series and all kinds of different activities.
And we talk so much on the podcast about how such a small world the art community is. I mean, both Adriana and I are frequent visitors of the North Carolina Art Museum. I actually live within a mile of there, and the gorgeous outdoor trails and the park that's there are part of my normal routine each week, is walking around, seeing the new sculptures in the gardens and all the upcoming activities. So we're so excited to be able to talk to you about your involvement with the museum and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Sounds fun.
So, quick question for you to get started. When did you first realize you wanted to be involved in the art world?
That's an excellent question, because I think art has always been a part of my life. And then when I had children of my own, it became very apparent that its influence brings so many positive things to their lives. So when I first moved to North Carolina and I had a 2-year-old and 4-year-old, the first place we went was the museum. And they did a Saturday class, and I can still remember that. And we just really latched onto everything museums, no matter where we live, could offer. And they're really community space. So that, that became apparent early on, that it's not just to visit during an exhibition. This is somewhere where you can raise your family, you can spend time with all generations. And so that was there. And then in 2014, I decided to kind of take a look at my life as kids were grown, and I wanted to give back even more. So I became a docent at the museum and really, really had to dive into everything about art. So that became just a huge commitment, and it grew my knowledge, but it also grew my appreciation. And then the rest is kind of history from there, where, my path took me. And a lot of it's where the museum had needs, and I was ready and willing to help out.
Yeah, that's awesome. How long was the program to be a docent?
It is a full year. I mean, things are changing now because it's really important to recognize what the community wants in any sort of tour or experience. And that might change like how you train and who you train. But when I was doing it, it was a full year. So you had to come during the day on Mondays, and you would have, your strict instruction, and then you had to study, and then you had to prep for tours that were assigned. So, docents are very committed. And I know, there's a lot of different models for that out there. Even like CAM does this great thing with middle schoolers. So it can look a number of ways.
Yes, I absolutely love that. And it's so funny because when I first moved to Raleigh, I went through the North Carolina Museum Docent program, and I did the 2-week trainings and took the tests. And I felt like it was so cool, especially as I was like an emerging artist and aspiring art professional in the field, to really be educated on what is the history of the museum, the history of its expansion, and the priority that the city of Raleigh took with like making it a priority in the arts. And then, like you were saying at CAM, they have the middle school docent program where they kind of instill that in kids early on of how do people interpret art? How do you explain art or pose questions to other people that are viewing it? I think it's such an empowering feeling and almost a skill set that it's a thing that's filling a need in the community of making people like bring down their barriers with art and really approaching it from an education first standpoint that's super approachable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. We just interviewed a collector who's also a lawyer, Mavis Greg, and she was talking about how she did the docent program at the Corcoran Gallery up, what was it, near DC, if I'm not mistaken, in that area. So that's kind of interesting to kind of learn more about that. And I'm sure, those artists and art professionals that listen to our podcast, I'm sure they're going to want to dig into that as well.
Yeah. And I think especially, for any program or any subject matter, really it's once you start trying to teach someone about the subject matter, you yourself learn so much more too, because the offhanded questions that people have, you say, I don't exactly know the answer to that. I'll let you know. So your foundation for knowledge just grows and grows and grows, which I'm sure has helped you so much now in the role that you have today. So now, as the director of visitor experience and retail at the North Carolina Museum of Art, what does this role really entail? What does your day-to-day look like or month-to-month scheduling?
Yeah. And the beauty of it is it always looks different, which is,
right.
That keeps the job fresh. It also keeps your perspective growing and changing because the visitor is always changing. And day to day, it's everything that you can think of on the front lines, whether, it's somebody walking in the door. Once they enter our campus, their experience is our responsibility. And that stems from entry, asking questions about art, simply asking where are the restrooms, making sure everything's accessible, everything's welcoming. And then retail is just this natural progression of that, because retail should be an experience. It's not just a transaction. So, you go through the galleries and then, you can stop somewhere and you can enjoy being in a retail space without any expectations. And that's what, with this amazing team I have, we're able to bring to the community. And I do think it's very appreciated. I think it's different. I think it's a change. And we're really excited. And we get like meeting artists like you. We feel like we're there for you, right? We're supposed to uplift your craft and show it to the community in a way that we can. And it also fits our mission. So, that's in the back of our mind, like, how can we still fit what we're doing, which is so important. And then, the back end of things, like this is all what we do when we're open, but, after hours, before hours, Mondays and Tuesdays when we're closed, we've got to make sure everything's in place to be able to function on the front lines. So there's lots that you see and lots that you don't see.
Yeah, I've gone to the basement before. There's a lot back there in the store where you're just like, how do you manage all these things and all these inventories and all? And of course, you have all these like museum collections. So you don't see everything upstairs. There's a lot, in the subterranean levels of things that are maybe coming in the future or in storage for now, or they're just in it's a lot. You'll manage a lot of stuff. But I will say too, I'm like, one of the things that I like about the NCMA particularly, as opposed to other types of museums, is it does feel open and very welcoming, regardless of whether you walk in with, I don't know, jeans and a t-shirt, kind of situation. Like you don't have to be like, this is all dressed up, white wall gallery situation. And there are some museums where you enter and it kind of feels like that, where it's a little cold, or there's nobody. Like there's the person at the entrance and then there's no staff. It feels like it's maybe a security person. And you're just like, it feels so alone, versus like the NCMA, it's like warm and welcoming and everybody's like, hi, how you doing? And, I don't know. It's just like a different feel. But anyways, that's just my experience. Anyways, I actually love going there. But I do want to ask you, on a personal level, how do you connect and grow with your local arts community? Like, any tips that you can share for other artists and art lovers?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we want to make sure we're doing our best job too. So it's a matter of getting out of the buildings, getting off our campus and seeing what everyone is doing out there, not just waiting to see who comes in the door or who submits a form showing they have interest, but what can we do to really find emerging artists and bring those items, those creations to our visitors on campus, and thinking of new ways to do that. And sometimes it's about service too. It might not be about finding an artist. For example, people on my team, we love to serve in the community. So we're going to the Women's Center this Friday morning to serve breakfast. And, that could be a really impactful experience for us as we think about learning about community. You can find artists anywhere, and you can also find ways to bring art to people anywhere. Not everyone needs to come to our campus. It's the State Museum. It could be we need to really start engaging on all these outreach efforts.
Yeah.
So it's so many different ideas, and never being closed-minded or too traditional is important.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, especially as you were saying of you're not just going out to build connections with local artists and makers, which is of course is very important in your professional role, but also other members of the community, other organizations in the community, to where you can bring art as this positive influence in their life to them.
Yes.
And so I know philanthropic efforts have always been a huge part of your personal life too. How do you feel like your personal connection to that as a value in your life has connected with you professionally? Are there any organizations outside of the workplace that you really connect with or find value in being involved with?
Yeah, and I think just in general, if you're philanthropic by nature, or it's something maybe that was instilled by your family that is in your heart, just having a heart to serve others and feeling a responsibility to do so, you'll find a way to bring that into your job or your work life. And that's really unique, because you can transform an organization from being something that exists for one reason into all of a sudden maybe serving for something they never even thought of. Mm-hmm. So that's really exciting. And a couple of local ones, Designed for Joy is a wonderful organization that helps women, specifically human trafficking victims. We've volunteered with them. We sell their product, but it just, getting to know what makes them thrive and understanding all these different vulnerabilities across the state is really important. Being a public museum. The Green Chair Project is another one. I mean, it's just amazing how many other organizations, a lot of small businesses are very philanthropic as well. Everybody, especially the pandemic, I feel like there's just been this shift of well, what can you do to grow your business, but what can you do to give back?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one thing that with starting this podcast, Adriana and I really wanted to focus on that idea of community over competition. That's one thing that we talk about so much, that I love within the arts, especially, that can be such a positive influence on our community, because I feel like, especially with organizations like these, if you have service first as part of your mindset and thinking about community first, it's not, oh, I need to get ahead, therefore you have to lose. You can both win. We can both lift each other up. And especially as creatives, everyone can rise together, and a win for one person is a win for everyone, which I think is a really powerful message for people to be able to connect with in the community.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And Jackie and I have this unofficial motto, so to speak, that we're big into sharing it forward. So it's as we've grown as artists and our career has evolved, we've had so many people just share their generous advice, not just for the career side or even the art side, but also even for the community side. Hey, there's this need, how can you give back somehow without necessarily wanting something in return? It's just I got this, I give it back, and perhaps that person will also give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
just kind of keep like the optimism train going. The smile.
Oh, yeah. And, I feel art space is that culture as well, not just the
Yeah.
two of you. And I don't know if that's intentional and who comes in as an artist, but, it's just like a wonderful sense of community.
Yeah. And I think it was really interesting in terms of Adriana and I both moved in 2020, the summer of 2020, really the heart of the pandemic. And I mean, we always joke that we were art space fangirls before we had studios there. We were there every first Friday. We were bugging the artists, asking them questions, and like just had this dream together of like, how amazing would it be to have a studio at Art Space one day? And then we were in the very fortunate position through hard work and generous advice of others of being able to have studios there. And then in the pandemic, thinking, okay, we feel so fortunate to have this opportunity. Yes, everything is shut down. Yes, our studios are not open to the public, but how can we even use what we have now to help other artists, which is really where the podcast started. All of those late night creative conversations, the conversations in passing 10 feet apart from other artists of business advice or tips of like, man, I wish I could be a fly on the wall for these conversations 5 years ago. And then realizing with the podcast, that's essentially what you can do. Like, what are those things and advice that you wish you had heard years sooner?
Yeah. And I think no matter what stage an artist or professional is in, they have something to give back. They might not know it.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't have to be at the level 10 and what you perceive as success, because even at a level 2, you can still share to the level 1s, or even at the level 1s, you can still share with people who haven't even started yet. It's like there's always something that you can give, or a specialty, a unique perspective that you have that makes someone else think in a different way.
Yep. Bring everybody along. Let's race together, essentially. So question for you, going back to the whole museum talk, which I'll insert something real quick. I figure we haven't really talked about this part yet, but so correct me if I'm wrong. The NCMA is a state-funded museum, right? Mm-hmm. So it is a piece of the government, if you will, which makes it a little bit different from museums that are perhaps funded out of trust or somebody's personal collection started it and everything else. So already as it is, it's a very interesting museum. Also the way that, I know the big, what do they call it? Sorry, the People's Collection. Is that the proper name? Like that's all changing. It's, from what I read, it's going to be more representative, which is very, very exciting, more representative of the community it's in. So there's a lot of different changes going on. And, again, being a state museum, obviously, there's a lot of moving parts, of course. But from your perspective, from where you're sitting and your role and like your side of things, right? What is your vision for the museum going forward? Where do you think it's going next?
What's exciting is I can predict and have my own ideas, but I also feel I need to observe and make sure I'm following what's actually there and what's our director's plan and our amazing exhibition design team, and not get too ahead of myself, because when I start, we've had sneak peeks and unveilings of this collection that's going to be reimagined, and it's outstanding. It's exciting. It's totally revolutionary. I mean, it's just amazing that I need to see a little more before I can fully commit to like, okay, how am I going to move forward? Because I want to make sure everything's aligned and that, I'm getting all my inspiration from where we're going, not me out here in the museum here. So I have an idea, but I think everything is more about inclusivity, being welcoming, representing art that we have, maybe thinking of it in a new way, questioning what should be on display, who should be displayed, and in finding more emerging artists across the state, even just getting off campus and seeing what else is going on is so helpful. And so I think that's going to fall into how we greet people when they enter campus. I think our connections with the park, we're really unique to have the 164 acres, because some of our visitors, that's their experience. It's always going to be nature. It's always going to be running, hiking, whatever their family does in the park, which is amazing.
Yep.
So how do we make sure that's as perfect as somebody going to a very high-end donor event, or something focused on an art lecture?
Yeah.
There's just so many possibilities. And then how does retail fit into that? But retail to me is just an extension of service. So as long as we keep that in mind and don't revert back to a more transactional separate experience, I think we'll be in good shape. We'll all stay aligned.
Yeah, and I love to hear that, because I remember going to the Philadelphia Museum of Art a few years back. Excellent museum, by the way. They had they had a special Van Gogh exhibition at the time. Yeah, I was that person that they were like, "Can you step back from the painting?" Because I was just like inches away from the sunflowers. I was like, "This is beautiful." Anyways, all that to say, the one thing, however, once you get to the end of the exhibition and get to the shop, I understand some of the things are going to be mass produced, but where I think the NCMA like stands out is there are actually one of a kind items at the end. I'm not saying mass produced, there's anything wrong with it, but there's also, it's a mixture. There's also like local artists, or at least made in the States kind of thing, like all mixed in. So it's definitely very different from that feel of like, oh, I could have just bought this on Amazon for half the price.
Yes.
It's another Van Gogh umbrella, because obviously you need Starry Night as an umbrella. Like, come on. Like, okay, I was this close to buying it, but I'm not $5 for an umbrella. It's like $20 on Amazon. Come on. So
right.
there is that. But as a visitor, and also as a person who wants to support the museum, and I know the retail shop is part of the way that we can give back to the museum and support, then perhaps having someone that made something based on the exhibition that's going on, or that it ties in, I'm a heck of a lot more likely to try to add that to my collection. And it's like, it adds to that experience that I was there at the museum, saw the exhibition, saw the work, and now I have this one of a kind memento, and at the same time, not only help the museum, but also help the artist who did it. It's like a win-win.
Yeah, I love that.
So I really love how y'all kind of tie all these things together. And again, it doesn't feel like a that cold retail, like you said, transactional only.
Right.
There's way more put into it. I don't know.
It reminds me of this past weekend, there was a visitor that came into our retail at CAM and was looking at many of Alexandre's, his small, like 4x4 florals that are outstanding. And they had them laid out and they weren't sure. And I said, hey, just a mile up the street, you could go to a studio. If these aren't what you want, please, like, this is important that, your art wall looks as it should. So inevitably they put them all back and they were going to go to Art Space, which I think is great. You could also look at that as, well, Janis, you just ruined that sale. But that's not what it's about, because ultimately, I promoted the artist, I promoted our mission. And in the end, it is the right choice, but you have to step back from like the immediate purpose of retail, right? To do that.
Yeah. And it really is thinking of like community first. You're spreading the awareness of him as an artist, his studio, art space in general. And maybe for that person, they were going to buy a 4x4 because that was what was available at the museum. But then they went into his studio and found this amazing 3-foot painting and decided to buy that instead. Like they had just made the best sale of his week kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that is really, I don't know, it's such an admirable quality, like as a leader within the arts, you've done such an amazing job with creating those relationships with local artists and putting artists first, which is much appreciated because you've done so with ourselves included. So from your advice and your experience, what can artists do to present themselves in a way that stands out to collectors or curators or even writers for articles or gallery owners? Do you have any advice for artists who are looking to stand out in a positive way?
I think, having talent is one thing, but then knowing how to run a business is another, and how you get advice to do it correctly and figuring out what are your goals, what do you need to do, and how genuine are you? Do you visit different studios? Do you take advice and feedback well? and adjust or pivot from it, because that can be hard too. And the more willing you are to work hard, you have to work hard. There are talented people, but to think that, to just see the end results of someone who's talented and successful, you're missing just all the hard work along the way. So hard work is very noble and important. And I think that is just, you can't skip that. So don't try to, but at the same time, have fun in, connecting to people, growing your network, just like you would if you were in any field of work. There's no difference. You have all these different social media tools. If you do find that that's not your thing, or you're more an introvert, or whatever those titles we want to give people, then maybe you partner with somebody that can do that for you, or, figuring out your superpowers and your weaknesses, and then just realigning and collaborating to get everything perfect.
Done is better than perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least giving it a good old try.
Yeah.
With that actually brings me to another question. So speaking of, perhaps weaknesses or not, but what is one thing that you've seen an artist do that you believe could harm their reputation, where you're like, don't do that. Oh no, like, you're so talented, this is great, and you just did X, like, anything?
I think, that's a really good question. Sometimes you have to assess, is there a hole in the market? Is there a need for what you're doing? And if, somebody is doing something fabulous, but there's 10 people where they'd like to have their creations for sale in their community already doing it, then you have to realign, like, okay, well, maybe there's a need for this somewhere else, or maybe I have to be realistic that I'm not filling a need in the community with this creation of mine. Just because it's special and wonderful doesn't mean it's needed. So if you want it in a store, you have to think of it that way. If you're making art to sell, you do have to think of it that way. If you're just making art for yourself to display, that could be totally different. So maybe you have those creations that are there because they are your story. But then if you really have things that you want to put out in the community for sale, then figure out what you are bringing that's different.
I like that you mentioned that, because I know for a lot of artists, sometimes even the thought of business or selling is a little bit like deer in the headlights, or they'll say, I made this thing, it feels true to me, so here we go, now people come flock and buy it, kind of thing. But I like how you're putting that, where it's like, yeah, you need to find a way to differentiate it somehow. If it looks exactly like everybody else, then why would somebody come to you and not somebody else, unless you were at a much cheaper price point, and that's not really going to help your career or your reputation. Right. So I like that. It's fine. Find that little extra something that makes it different from the other 10 people that maybe are doing something similar. Stand out.
Yeah. And feedback, being open to feedback, which is hard.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think that probably answers the next question that I have for you, but obviously I'll see if you have something extra to add to that. Do you have any advice for artists that are trying to make a living from their art?
I think the two of you have the best advice there, but from what I've observed is maybe something has to be your side passion, and you actually have something that sustains your living, your livelihood. For example, I think of a wonderful artist at the museum who is an art handler, but also has a studio and is a wonderful artist in his spare time. I think that model is used by people in all different professions, as they have what they do professionally, and then they have this other side of themselves. So it's a matter of making time in your life to do both. And then maybe there comes a point where that passion and side hustle actually becomes the main thing. It doesn't necessarily have to, but it could if that's it, but you have to work towards it. I'm not sure you can just start and make it a livelihood.
Yeah, because that's a really big difference, especially when you think about, okay, the pretty black and white logistics of finances of, okay, well, how am I going to pay for groceries? How am I going to pay for my rent? And even if you have short-term early success in your career, or maybe you launch one collection of art that sells out immediately and you feel like you're just like, oh, I need to quit my job tomorrow. Like I'm an overnight success. Like, is that really sustainable? And do you want to put your pressure on your artwork like that? I'm very open and transparent that like I do have a day job in digital marketing and social media. I absolutely love it and want to be able to do both as long as possible because they do kind of both like fill up different buckets for me in terms of what I enjoy doing. But I feel like a huge benefit of it is that it does take a bit of the pressure off when I'm making a painting. It's not like I have to make a painting that I can sell for X amount because my bills are due in 5 days. So like I need to make it today and sell it tomorrow in order to pay my bills. Like that's pressure. And like, that's going to definitely affect your creativity. I think that's kind of a stigma, especially coming from a background of maybe not making artwork and then starting to make it again, where some artists may devalue the work that they are doing because they're not doing it full time. When, as you were saying, like, just because you're not doing the job as your full-time income doesn't make it less credible or mean that it will always not be your full-time. Like you may get to the point where you can transition, but doing so in a smart and strategic way is definitely helpful for sustainability. That's for sure.
And it takes time to plan. I do art full-time, but I also have several income streams.
Right.
So that if the original art sales on one end perhaps are a little bit slower for a month, there's other ways that I can make money also related to art. Things like teaching or art, like services for other artists, or, you know, basically like if you're going to do it full, chances are you're going to have some side hustles too. Right. But yeah, it's definitely not a quit now. And yeah, you need a plan. But that's a story and an episode for another day. So as we start to wrap this up, I want to ask you from your view and your perspective, and of course you do talk to a lot of different artists and interact with a lot of them. From your personal perspective, how do you define success as an artist? Like you see an artist and you're like, that's a successful one.
You know, sometimes I honestly don't know, which is really important. You know, I think if I became too much of a critic and an expert, that could almost hurt me. But I can't help but learn, like observe and learn. And I do notice some things that seem to be a trend. It's when and so many artists are doing this. They want to be connected to someone who buys their merchandise. So if they come in and they buy one of your works and I share your social media, you know, they're going to send you a photo of the piece in their house and you're going to love that. Like you're not above connecting to your purchasers, the people who love your work. So the more that the artist truly appreciates those that buy, or even if they're not buying it, what if they come in and they take your card because they just think your work's beautiful? And you know, wouldn't it be great if, you know, you could connect in an email or just on social media? I just think that's just as important because, you know, that lifts you up to know that somebody, whether they bought something or not, like just fell in love with something and why.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I feel like that's one thing, as we've talked about at Art Space, having a community facing studio, that's a huge push in the beginning and like a huge value that we have is that connection to the community. So I think that's an amazing way to think about the connection with artists and their community too.
Yeah, that's a big trend. I think overall in retail, you're going to see the public the community wanting to connect to the artist or artisan. So, you know, it could be when you go to buy any piece of clothing or jewelry that you want to see it being made while you're there. You know, that like whole experience, I think is only going to increase. And I think I think it's fabulous. I think it'll be exciting to see how activated spaces could be. And, you know, if you think of art space, hopefully there'll be more of art spaces in the world growing.
Yeah.
There can never be enough. Like you said, it's community, not competition. So it'd be fabulous.
Yeah. Especially with the role of social media these days, really enhancing that connection. It's like, when in the past have artists been able to have like a direct relationship with potentially all fans of their work? Like that's such an empowering feeling. can feel intimidating at times as a business owner, but it's such a privilege. And I think one that many artists do so well with connecting with their audiences.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well done.
So what is one piece of advice that you wish you had heard before you got started on your journey as a creative professional?
Yeah, that is just an amazing question. So thank you for that, because first of all, you have to be willing to listen with whatever response a person gives you if you ask a question. And I don't know at every point in your life, if you're as open. So I think that's the first thing is, making sure that you're always asking questions. But I think it would have been helpful to understand that there's like a season for everything in your life. And, what might be best for 5 years right now could be totally different 10 years from now. And just like not thinking the immediate situation will be your future. And, just having, letting that relax you and seeing it as an opportunity and not thinking that doors are closed because of time.
I love that. I think that's super, super helpful. So frequently we can kind of get in this tunnel vision of thinking that our current existence is how it's always going to be, whether in a good way or a bad way. So understanding, moving forward, everything can change so quickly. And both being grateful for where you are now, but also not feeling like you're stuck in the place you are forever. Super important.
Yeah. I love that word grateful too. I think having gratitude every day for something, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I know. I'm just nodding. I'm relating to all this so much. I'm like, there came to a point where, as I was building my career in the investments industry, nothing related to art. I was like, this is it. Like, am I going to do this for the rest of my life? And it's like, of course, art was like, just, in the back of my ear going like, come paint. This is your calling, come over here. And of course it took time to transition, but yeah, that's a really good point, especially too for emerging artists or even younger. Well, actually, it doesn't matter what age they are, but artists starting out and they're like, but what I did doesn't look like what I want it to be. And why can't this be like already done the way I envision it? Or why can't galleries come like knock down my door? And it's like, it just takes time. Nobody likes to hear it, but it all just takes time. And might just, like I said, it might not be the right season yet. It might be coming up. So love that. So last question. If you had $100 right now, what would you splurge it on or invest it in? It has to be something that brings you joy, relates to art or business. But wait, there's more. I'm going to throw a kicker for you. It cannot be from the retail store at the museum because that's too much of an easy answer. Sorry, I had to throw the curveball in there.
I love that. What I think lately I've been kind of obsessing over any sort of cooking or anything in the social media world with like people who are like cooking and sharing. And like any influencer in that area. And I think I would need $100 and some time. So maybe I get a day with my $100 and I would like just find some fabulous recipes, spend $100 on the best ingredients and cook and share. Like, right. You're not just going to eat that yourself, but like the joy you can give others with creating a meal that is hard. We're all busy, right? The three of us probably don't get to stop and do that and as much as we should, but like, just a simple thing like that I would love that. Maybe
there could be like a Ncma unofficial event potluck situation at some point. I'm like, I have this awesome pumpkin flan recipe.
Yeah, we need to have like a potluck in our studio. Better yet, Art in Bloom, which is a huge event at the North Carolina Museum of Art each year, is where they create floral arrangements related to the art in the collection. What if there was a food version of that, where maybe we each have to make plates that are inspired by the artwork, and then everyone can eat it.
Oh my gosh,
sign me up.
I'm writing that down. That is amazing.
Yeah. Or even the emergent. Okay, because that's a giant event. That might be too much to add that in. How about the emergent artisan one? Maybe you have a potluck edition. I don't know. And then artists.
I love it.
I don't know.
Look at these ideas.
Ideas.
Coming up with.
Yeah, it is around lunchtime.
Yeah.
Around lunchtime, we're recording this episode, so maybe that's trickling in too. But we could probably brainstorm on this for hours and hours. But before we let you go to your very busy day, what upcoming projects or initiatives are you most excited about at the museum, and how can people stay in touch with you?
Yes. So you can always send me an email. It seems to be the best way for me to stay organized. And you can feel free to share that with people. We also have an email at the museum. It's just help@ncartmuseum.org for anything. You'd find me that way. But I'm most excited at the moment about our new space at Cam Raleigh downtown, because this concept of bringing us downtown has just been inspiring for my whole team. I mean, just to have a new space and new visitors and a new area to serve seems to have some unlimited potential. So we've only been there a few weeks, so we're just really in the stages of early excitement and trying to figure out like how we can do it so that we make a difference, and what legacy does it leave? Like what need is it filling?
Yeah, absolutely. And how can listeners stay connected with you and or the NCMA, the social media or website for that?
Yeah, I think, our social media is amazing. Whether it be our stories or posts on Instagram, I think is the best way, really, because that's just going to be the most dynamic. You can visit the website, and of course, there's going to be a lot of information there. But I think if you want to get the more dynamic take on it, that's what I would do.
Awesome. That sounds good. So we'll make sure all of those are linked in at the podcast episode notes, as well as our blog, so people can stay connected with you, with the museum, all the amazing upcoming events that you guys have going on, as well as events in the future that are yet to be revealed yet.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share what you have learned, you can follow us and interact with us on social media. I'm at Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms, or you can follow the podcast at Level Up Artist. Thank you so much, Janis, for joining us today. We really loved today's conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, awesome.